Well, now faith is, I think, is an amazing statement, and it's our theme for this month as well. But it's straight out of the scriptures. It's from Hebrews, and it explains what faith really is. But I think in many ways we need to actually apply and appropriate what faith is in our own lives. Unbelief sees God through circumstances, but faith puts God between itself and circumstances and looks at those same circumstances through Him. I think it's very important for us when we talk about faith to understand that it's very tangible. It's very applicable in our everyday lives. And if we believe that unbelief sees God through our circumstances, if in our practical everyday life, we only look at our circumstances and feel a sense of despair or fear or anxiety or whatever else we feel when we look at the reality of our circumstances, then we're not really looking at them through faith and through God's eyes. And I think when you look at the practicality of what faith is in our own lives, we have to also remind ourselves that throughout the scriptures, God always asks questions, right? Where are you in Genesis? What do you see, Ezekiel? What would you want me to do for you? God always asks us questions, and our response to the questions that God asks us is dependent on what we see. So if we live our lives and only see through a prism or a lens of unbelief, we can never really respond to what God asks of us in faith and in the ability to inherit whatever it is that God has for us. You know, so often we live in the zone where we have all the questions. We may have more questions than there are answers. But really, God is a God that asks us questions. You know, when God came and appeared to Solomon, he said, "Now, Solomon, you ask, what do you want me to do?" You ask me. God doesn't always tell us, this is what I'm going to do for you. So God won't appear and say, Tabitha, this is what I want to do for you. God will say, Tabitha, you ask me, what is it that you want me to do for you? That's the nature of God that we see weaved right through the scriptures. God is the one that asks us questions, and it's the lens that we use that determines our response to God. So when we say, God, I would like you to do X, Y, and Z, when we see through eyes of faith and we lift off unbelief, then we are in a position where we can ask God for the right things. And when we do that, we will inherit. And then God said, in terms of Solomon, God said, because you have asked me for wisdom, I will give you far more than what you have asked me. God doesn't restrict himself to what we ask him for, but that is always the starting point of where God meets us in terms of what God is going to do in our lives, where he says, dare, we have to dare to dream. And whatever we do, God is able to do exceedingly, abundantly, above all that we ask or even dare to see or imagine. God is able to do. So therefore, when we look at the whole concept of what faith is, and now faith is, we need to remind ourselves that in the everyday, ordinary routines of our life, which is where our life is, that we see our circumstances not through the lens of unbelief, but we see our circumstances through faith, where faith stands between our circumstances. It places God in between. It places God who can do so much more. It says, even though my circumstances may be X, Y, or Z, I'm not limited by my circumstances because I have a God that is beyond my circumstances. If I feel like I don't have enough, I'm living in lack, I understand through faith that my God is able to supply all my needs. That becomes the prism that I see my circumstance. So I don't see lack. I see God. I see his ability to provide for me. If I'm in a situation and I'm desperately in need of healing, I don't look through unbelief just at the reality of my situation that says I am sick, but I, through faith, put God in between my circumstance and say, I am healed because of God's stripes. He was on the cross. He took my sickness, and therefore I can, with the exchange of the cross, live in healing. I don't look at my circumstance. I look through my circumstances. I look at God, and that's when I see, and I can walk and I can live my life in the everyday, ordinary routines of life. I can live a life of faith. That's when God says he wants us to walk by faith, not just dwell in faith, but walk. It's active, it's every day, it's every area. Whether I go, I mean, now it's different because of COVID. We don't go to the market or to work or, to the office physically, but, it's in our every interaction of our lives. When we live a life of faith, it must touch every circumstance, every circumstance. And, today through this pandemic, whatever it is, whatever your circumstance is, don't allow unbelief to be the prism that you see things through. Allow faith to be that prism. Allow God to stand between your circumstance and yourself so that you can see the magnificence of who he is, through the reality of whatever our need is. And so when he asks us, what can I do for you? We can be prepared with the right answer that will get us the right response. Amen.